Now, different ways to do a potato. Many different people have different ways. I will caveat this now. I am missing a nerve in my arm, which causes intense numbness. It's called the ulnar nerve. When you hit your elbow, that funny bone is actually the closest nerve to the skin in the human body. It's called the ulnar nerve. My right hand, I am ambidextrous, but most of the time I'm right hand dominant. Anybody that's true ambi has a dominant hand, and a lot of times it switches over time depending on what I'm doing. Sometimes I'll be left hand dominant, but most of the time I'm right hand dominant. So if you ever watch me cut, sometimes you'll see me with the chef's grip, which is a firm death grip on the blade, as with my left hand. With my right hand, however, I have a tendency to push this finger through, and I grip with this finger and my thumb. And these fingers, generally, I have some feeling, but not a whole lot. And this tends to throw people off. Part of the reason why I grip the knife like this is because of the lack of nerves, and the other part is because I used to do eskrima, which is a style of martial art, using sticks, machetes, and this is how I was trained to thin up, if you will. So it's partially due to habit, partially due to feeling. For most people, holding that knife with that, it's hard for me to do, with that grip, with that death grip, is going to be more common. The other thing you'll see is what we call the rock and claw method, and anybody that's been through any culinary training will be taught to do this claw. And instead of holding whatever you're cutting with your fingertips, you're holding it with the edges, with almost your fingernails. You're doing this claw, and the reason why you do that is because if you miss or you go too far, rather than losing a digit, you're losing some skin. Still hurts a lot, bleeds a lot, but I'd rather suffer some skin knuckles than being that guy, or the shop teacher guy. It was something that it's interesting to learn. It's not very difficult with potatoes. It gets much more interesting with our onion. I've had long conversations about how there's no convenient way to dice an onion. Potatoes are really starchy. You'll notice I have multiple knives here. In fact, I don't have a knife I want. Potatoes are really starchy and have a tendency to gum up the knife that you're going to use. So be aware of that. I like to use a much heavier knife. Believe it or not, I'm going to trade in my... This is a Hinkle that I got from my grandmother for my Slitzer, which is a very low-cost chef's knife, but I'm very happy with it because of the weight. I like the weight behind the Slitzer set. I will tell you right off, a lot of people think that the price of the knife means quality. Can you use the knife? Can you keep the knife sharp? Do what makes you happy. I'm a tool user. I'm not a brand user. So I really love this weight, particularly with potatoes. So we're going to go ahead and find our flattest spot for a potato, and because we're doing slices, we're going to use our rock and our claw. And we're just going to go ahead and... Now notice how I don't move what I'm cutting through the knife, but I move the knife through what I'm cutting. This is the proper way. Now a lot of people will use a banjo slicer. I recommend it, to be honest. I don't like it. The reason being is it gives me more chances to practice my knife skills. As you can see, I'm not cutting symmetrically there, which is typical for potatoes. But it gives me a chance to practice. And so I sacrifice convenience a lot of the times for experience. And it's just kind of part of my lifestyle, I guess you would say. I grew up doing everything the hard way. That one's awfully thick as you get to the end. That's the nice thing about the banjo slicer, is you get consistent cuts all the way through. We're going to go ahead and we're going to just slice these up real quick. And what they say is when you're working on your knife skills, eat that later. There's the other half of it. Worry more about your accuracy, your size, and your safety. Again, you see how that just kind of rides right there. Worry about speed later. You'll see that people do this. That dulls the edge of your knife, and it also ruins your board, to be honest, which, as a carpenter, first and foremost, is a travesty. So we just kind of take our time and we work on uniform and clean cuts to get our desired outcome. And I sometimes slide in instead of rock. But as soon as I feel the blade hit the board, I have a tendency to then do my rock. I do not want to slide my blade. I don't want to saw on the board. That dulls my blade. Or scrape like I just did, which is fine. For me, one of my hobbies is purchasing antique wood tools, chisels and planes and the like, and I actually sharpen and refinish them. So I hate to say it, but any opportunity I get to dull the blade of my knife, I sadly am not heartbroken by, because it gives me an excuse to play with my other hobbies. We've got some really good potato chips here. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut these guys. I'm doing a horrible job of showing you guys that claw method with my thumb hanging out there like a sitting target, honestly. But definitely learn to claw up. That was actually one of my biggest problems through my last culinary academy. Was chef would come by and he'd rap me on the knuckles and he'd go, "You better claw up." And there's a reason why. Now, before I move on, I've got more potatoes here, but I wanted to go through our onion and I wanted to go through our bell pepper. So we're going to set my Schlitzer aside. Now, one of the coolest things I've ever learned with a bell pepper, we're going to slide our trash can over here. Go ahead and wash. Sanitize just a little bit. There we go. Make sure we're sanitized and washed. Now, again, if you're cooking at home, it's up to you how much you want to wash and sanitize. But it becomes a habit. Because everything that I'm doing is going to be cooked and it's going to be brought to a temp higher than 165, I'm not so worried about cross-contamination with my vegetables. Typically, when you're cutting, you're going to want to sanitize your cutting board or your work surface between everything that you're working on. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to use my actually I'm going to use my paring knife. This is a utility knife, also Slitzer. It's got that weight behind it. It's a rather long one, which is what I like about it. It's one of my sharpest knives that I keep. I keep it incredibly sharp. I keep it for areas where I need more control. I particularly like this knife when carving meats because I can get a level of control and a level of cut as I would with a chef's knife, but I can get the level of accuracy of a fillet knife kind of all in one. As far as what knife to use and how you use it, that's entirely personal choice. I've got a Santoku, which I genuinely love. It's probably one of the most versatile knives I use. You can get pink and purple colors on Amazon for the $20 range. They're great knives. They work. Use them, abuse them. If you're comfortable with a knife, use the knife. If you're uncomfortable with anything in the kitchen, and it's the same way in the workshop, if you're uncomfortable performing work with a tool, the way that you're thinking about doing it, don't do it. It's best to come up with a different way, a different method or a different tool than it is to harm yourself. And it's just kind of a rule of thumb. It's a rule of thumb in the workshop. It's a rule of thumb on the job site. And it's definitely a rule of thumb in the kitchen. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to slice the bottom off this guy. And I have a tendency to slice and leave a lot of excess. You could slice up a little bit more. I'll explain why I do things the way I do for a reason. I'll gauge how deep my stem is there. And then I'll cut the top based on that. And I'll also explain why. Most people cut the top and the bottom off the pepper and they throw them away. Something that Chef drove into me is, hey, how many pounds of peppers do you throw away a year? And again, this is why I like my smaller knife. When you can just save that pepper, particularly when it comes to a dice. So now we've got this pepper. I'm going to go ahead and just slice down. And I'm going to take all that inner white. Kind of like that. Sometimes I'll cut them in half. Depends on the size of the pepper and how tight they are. This one's actually pretty tight. And I'll go through and just cut that inside out. The white part's a little bit bitter, so I'm going to clean some of that off. Just because. Now a little bit's not a big deal. To be honest, most people never notice. But there's the quickest and easiest way to clean a pepper. Now from there, we've got our pepper. Now, because we're frying these and they're going to be fried for a little while, I'm going to again use my rock and claw method. Even though I'm not using the chef's knife, it's the same mentality there. And I'm going to go ahead and slice this up real quick. With peppers, depending on the type of pepper, how ripe it is, the type of knife you have. Sometimes certain knives will have a tendency to slip on the skin or have a hard time penetrating the skin. You'll notice this if you've ever tried to dice a tomato. The skin is very difficult to cut through, and the rest of the tomato is squishy. So, also another reason why I use this knife. Also another reason why I start at such a high angle, because I can get in there. And sometimes I'll tilt the knife at the end just to kind of get that separation. So we'll